Well, after a long, long college basketball season, we have finally made it to March Madness. We have made it to March Madness. The brackets are here. And this year, of course, didn't do one last year. But this year, I will be filling out my personal bracket. And, I'm just saying, if I'm the first one to drop my bracket, I'm not going to lie, I may get viewed. You want me to shut up, I know. But we've made it. I have a lot of opinions on everything. This is going to be a long video, obviously. Let's just get straight into it. We're not wasting any time here. We have the South region with Auburn, Alabama State, and San Francisco, Pennsylvania Red Flash, I believe. We have Louisville versus Creighton. Louisville getting the 8 seed is kind of surprising because Louisville has looked great. The ACC obviously not as good as it usually is this year, but Louisville had an amazing season. So the fact that they got an 8 seed is a little surprising. Creighton lost in their conference championship. They're all right. They have some good players, but we have Michigan versus, for the first time ever, UC San Diego. As a Michigan State fan, low-key Michigan got screwed because they just won the Big Ten championship today. And, of course, the regular season conference championship matters more than the actual, tournament championship, whatever it's called. The regular season championship matters more, but Michigan did still win the conference championship, and they only got a 5 seed. And UC San Diego is hot. I believe they have 30 wins. This is their first time ever making the tournament. We're going to have to see with my picks, but Michigan low-key got hoed. We have Texas A&M versus Yale. Yale, they've been liked a lot by a lot of people for upsets. They're playing the Texas A&M team that's pretty good. Ole Miss versus San Diego State or UNC, University of North Carolina. Now, to keep this short, it's an absolute disgrace that UNC got in over teams like Boise State, West Virginia, especially Indiana. As a person from Indiana, I like my Indiana teams. And let's be honest, every team in Indiana sucks other than Purdue, which is bad because I don't like Purdue. So it's kind of sad. But Indiana definitely I wouldn't say deserved to be in. But with how the bubble looked, I would say that you should have put them in over UNC. You should have put in West Virginia over UNC. You should have put in Boise State over UNC. And the fact that UNC made it when they went 1-12 against Quad 1 is it's disrespectful. It's disrespectful that they made it, especially in a bad ACC year. It's disrespectful that they made it. But we'll get to that. We've got Iowa State, Iowa State and Lipscomb. Interesting school name. We've got Marquette versus New Mexico. I like New Mexico a lot this season, not so much Marquette. And we've got Michigan State, the Spartans, taking on Bryant. Michigan State, obviously, my favorite team. Even over the Indiana teams, I've always liked Michigan State. I don't know why. But, they've been on a heater. They won 8 Quad 1 games in a row. And, of course, they did lose to Wisconsin. That is fair. But I think Michigan State was good enough to be a 1 seed. But, we're just going to have to take what we get. In the West, we have Florida versus the Norfolk State Spartans. Florida just gained their 1 seed today. Because they beat Tennessee in the SEC championship. I'm not going to lie. I'm liking Florida a lot. I'm really liking Florida. We'll see where that goes. We have the 2-time defending national champions, UConn, versus Oklahoma. Oklahoma with the 9 seed is absolutely insane. Because let's be honest, Oklahoma's not that good. Oklahoma is not that good. You know, they were like really bad in their conference. Just a 9 seed, I don't know about that. Maybe 10, maybe 11, 9 seed now. We've got Memphis versus Colorado State. Memphis really has not looked like the best in recent times, and Colorado State has looked pretty well. They beat Boise State in their conference championship, and they got the auto bid. We've got Maryland versus Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon has been through a dynasty, honestly. I'm pretty sure they have made the tournament the last 3 years. And Maryland, every time they lose on a game winner. So we'll see if Grand Canyon can hit a game winner on Maryland. We got Missouri versus Drake. I was from Missouri. I like Missouri. I'm not a fan of Missouri, but I like Missouri. But this Drake team, obviously, a really good team. They're in the tournament every year. I'm pretty sure they've also gone to the last 3 tournaments. So Missouri is going to have a tough time against Drake. Texas Tech versus UNC Wilmington. I have no idea what or who's on UNC Wilmington. Just saying. We've got Kansas versus Arkansas. Now, Kansas has a specific freshman named Flory Badunga. And if you don't know, he was one of the best basketball players in the state of Indiana. He carried one school all the way to the championship like a couple years ago. Of course, they lost. You know, I know Flory. I've seen him before, like in person before, because you know I go to school in Indiana. So I like Kansas because I like Flory. The screen did a backflip, but Kansas hasn't really been using him well a lot. So can Arkansas pull off the upset? Maybe, maybe not. And for our last game in the West, we have St. John's, who has had an amazing year, versus Omaha, making their first NCAA tournament in program history. Out in the East, we have the number 1 seeded Duke. Cooper Flagg likely will come back from injury. Hopefully, at least, we would like to see him play. Versus American from the Patriot and Mount St. Mary's. I think that's Mount St. Mary's. Is Duke's winning that. We've got Mississippi State versus Baylor. One of the best games. Let's be honest. It's going to be a really good game. Baylor has been on a pretty good streak. Mississippi State, obviously, around top 25 in the AP poll a lot. We got Oregon versus Liberty. I just want to point this out here. There's a guy on Liberty. His last name is Matheny. If you watched that semifinal that Liberty had, I forgot what team they were playing. This dude shot like 5 threes in a row. So he might be the next goalkeeper. Who knows? Yeah, I'm really liking Liberty. Yeah, just saying. Arizona versus Akron. Akron also has had a really good season, but Arizona is a pretty good team. BYU versus VCU. VCU winning their conference championship earlier today. And BYU has been, honestly, one of the best teams in the country for the past few weeks. They've been on a good win streak. That got snapped by Houston, I believe. We got Wisconsin somehow above Michigan, even though Michigan won the Big Ten tournament. I don't understand that. Versus Montana. If you had to ask me who's on Montana, I don't know who's on Montana. I don't have a lot of hope for Montana. We have St. Mary's versus Vanderbilt. Good to see Vanderbilt heal. The school's just on to come up overall. St. Mary's, really good defensive team. I don't really like them too much. They might make it out of the first round. We'll see. And we have number 2 seeded Alabama versus Robert Morris. Alabama, obviously, pretty good team in contention for that 1 seed. Just didn't get it. Got edged out by both Tennessee and Florida. And of course, Tennessee went on to lose. Florida went on to win and get the 1 seed. Alabama's a really good team. They just really don't have the offense. the defense. They definitely have the offense, but they don't have the defense. And finally, in the Midwest region, we have Houston versus SIUE, who have made their first tournament in program history. Houston, really good defensive team. I picked them to win the tournament last year. I didn't film it, but I picked them to win the tournament, and they got out like the round of 16, round of 32. That was a complete disappointment. So we're just going to see how Houston unfolds here. We have the 8-seeded Gonzaga versus the 9-seeded Georgia. Georgia got hoed here. Gonzaga is way better than the 8 seed. Honestly, they could beat Houston. Yeah, that might clue into who I'm going to pick. But Gonzaga is a really good team. They have really good analytics, if you care about that, obviously. So Gonzaga. I don't know. We have Clemson versus McNeese. Not a good pull from Clemson there. Pretty good team. The ACC, obviously. ACC's not too good this year. McNeese may win that game. We're going to have to see. We got Purdue versus High Point. High Point making their first ever tournament in program history. I'm liking High Point a lot, honestly. They're like 28, 29, and 5. They have a really good 3-ball. You know, if those shots could land, they could beat Purdue. We're going to have to see. Illinois at the 6th line facing either Texas or Xavier. Illinois, they're a really good team, but they were just like injured and sick, and you know that let them lost some games. So now they're down at the 6th. They're either playing Texas or Xavier. Yeah, Texas is an interesting team. Xavier is too. We're gonna have to see who comes out of that. But could they beat Illinois? We'll see. Kentucky faces off Troy. Troy's another one of those teams where if you ask me, I would have no clue who's on Troy. But, you know, last year, we said the same thing about Oklahoma, and then Jack Golke popped off for 10-3, so who really knows? I think this Kentucky team is different, though. UCLA versus Utah State, I'm not really liking the matchup. I don't really like either teams here. UCLA's cool. Utah State, I don't know about Utah State. They've had a really good record, but you know, I'm not too confident in Utah State. And finally, we have Tennessee versus Wofford. Obviously, Tennessee could have got the last 1 seed. They didn't pull it off. It's Florida's now. Now they have to play for Wofford, whatever they are, in the round of 64. Now that we've gone through every team, let's actually go through the bracket. Now, obviously, I'm not stupid. We can just set this off right now. I'm not gonna edge any of y'all. I do not have a 16-1 upset. They've only happened 2 times in history, and let's be honest, SIUE, I'm pretty sure has a negative record. Duke versus American versus Mount St. Mary's. Cooper Flagg's injured. That really hasn't mattered because they beat Louisville. They beat UNC without Cooper Flagg. And they've looked amazing without Cooper Flagg. So let's be honest. Duke's not losing their first game. Florida, Norfolk State, maybe. Norfolk State's not winning. Norfolk State's not winning. They're not that good of a team. And then Alabama State is mid. And the Red Flashes, I think the Red Flashes might have the losing record, one of the two. And then the Red Flashes, they had a pretty good run to the tournament, but let's be honest, just Auburn's not losing it. So, you just had to get that out of the way. There are no 16-1 upsets. Now let's actually get into the bracket. We've got number 8 Louisville versus number 9 Creighton. Louisville, obviously really good team. Had a really good season. Creighton, not so much. Ryan Kalkbrenner is pretty good. I'm taking Louisville. They've just looked like the better team. Creighton's a little bit fraudulent. And, you know, it'd be disappointing if Louisville had this great of a season just to get bounced. Michigan versus UC San Diego. Now, just want to preface this. I'm not trying to act in bias, But I'm not going to lie. I'm liking UC San Diego. They've looked like one of the best mid-majors in the country. I think they're like 44 in the net. They were a really good team. Michigan got hoed with the spot, honestly. Michigan wasn't looking good until they reached a tournament, and then all of a sudden they just went on a heater. Don't really know how that happened, but of course, respect to them. I think they used up all their luck. I think UC San Diego is going to come in as underdogs, and they're going to come in and beat Michigan. They just seemed like a really good team at this point in time. So I'm liking UC San Diego to pull off the upset. Texas A&M versus Yale. Yale has looked like a really good team this season. Can they beat Texas A&M and pull off another upset just like they did back with Auburn? It's possible. It is possible. However, I'm leaning Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M is a pretty good team. They did get upset by Texas. I understand that. I think Texas A&M can pull it off and beat Yale. I might come back to that. Ole Miss versus SDSU or UNC. I may as well say Alcorn, and that's not Alcorn State. Alabama State versus the Red Flashes. I'm taking the Red Flashes there. They've had a really good 3-game stretch. I think they can improve it to 4 and make the tournament at large. And SDSU versus UNC. I think it's a disgrace that UNC made it, so I am picking SDSU to win that game. However, I'm taking Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a bunch of frauds. Let's be honest. They're not winning their round of 32 game. Not at all. However, I don't think SDSU or UNC are either good enough teams to beat Ole Miss. It's possible, definitely. I'm not ruling that out. No, thinking about it. No, I'm going to stick with it. I think Ole Miss is just good enough to beat either of those teams, to be honest. So I have Ole Miss moving on. Iowa State versus Lipscomb. I'm not big on Lipscomb. I'm not really big on Lipscomb. I like Iowa State. I like the Iowa State team. I'm picking Iowa State to beat Lipscomb and move on. Marquette versus New Mexico. I think Marquette are frauds. I don't think they're that good. However, I will be taking them over New Mexico. New Mexico isn't the greatest team either. They're pretty good. Obviously, they've had a great season. I don't think they're the best. I'm taking Marquette. Kind of concerning me that there's not a lot of upsets here. We're going to get back to that, of course. We're going to look through everything. Michigan State versus Bryant. Come on. I think it's pretty obvious who I'm choosing. Michigan State, one of the best teams in the nation, should be a 1 seed. They'll handle Bryant. Come on, Bryant's not that good. UConn versus Oklahoma. Will the national champions, or the 2-time national champions, go out in the round of 64? I don't think so. I think UConn's a little bit better of a team. Oklahoma did not have a good season in the SEC, so I am taking UConn to beat Oklahoma. Memphis, Colorado State. I'm not liking this Memphis team. I'm taking Colorado State. They've had a really good run these past few weeks. They look like a really good team. Beat Boise State in the championship. I'm taking the upset over Memphis, who have had a lot of close games. I'm not liking them a lot, so Colorado State moves on. Maryland versus Grand Canyon. I'm taking Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon's a pretty good team. College. Is it a real college? Who knows? But Maryland, they're good, but they're not great. And Grand Canyon definitely has the fight to win a first-round game. I think Maryland gets upset here, and that creates a 12 versus 14 in the round of 32, which is interesting. Missouri versus Drake. Call me the upset man, but I'm also taking Drake. Kind of concerned with how many upsets are going on in this bracket, but Missouri, they're a good team. They're not a great team. Drake, they got absolutely hosed last year, or was that Samford? It's one of the two teams, but Drake, We picked them for the upset last year. It didn't happen. I'm taking Drake over Missouri. Sorry to the Missouri fans, of course. Missouri could definitely win that game, but I'm liking Drake a little better. Texas Tech versus UNC Wilmington. Don't know who's on UNC Wilmington. I'm taking Texas Tech to move on. Kansas versus Arkansas. Even though Kansas are very fraudulent, they can go on a run if they're good enough to. If they lock in, they're a really good team. I'm taking Kansas to move on. And St. John's versus Omaha. Can Omaha get a win in their first ever big stance? No. St. John's has had way too good of a season to go out here. I'm taking St. John's to move on. American versus Mount St. Mary's. I'm leading Mount St. Mary's. The Patriots always a terrible league. Colgate wins it every year, not this year, of course. So I'm taking Mount St. Mary's to move on to face Duke. Obviously, that doesn't matter. Mississippi State versus Baylor. I'm leaning Baylor. I like the Bears. They've had a pretty good run. Mississippi State is a French top 25 team, but I'm just not too confident in them. Oregon versus Liberty. Another 12 versus 5 upset. I'm taking Liberty. I'm telling you that dude, Caden Metheny, is going to pop off. He's going to pop off. I saw him play. He's a really good player. I think he'll do good. I think he'll will his Liberty teammates to victory. Akron versus Arizona. I'm going to be honest. I'm sorry to the Akron fans. I'm taking Arizona to move on. I think Arizona is the way better team. Akron has had a really good season. However, you just got a bad draw with Arizona, to be honest. BYU versus VCU. Of course, VCU has looked like a really good team the past few weeks. They have pretty good analytics. But BYU's look like one of the best teams in the nation. I'm taking them to move on. Wisconsin versus Montana. If there was any other 14 teams, if this was Yale, I'm picking Yale. If this was, what was the other one? If this is Grand Canyon, I'm picking Grand Canyon. That was Yale. And then if this was High Point, I'm picking High Point. But let's be honest, I don't like Montana. I don't like that Montana team. I don't think they're that good. I'm taking Wisconsin to move on. St. Mary's versus Vanderbilt. I think the upset can happen. I think that Vanderbilt will be hungry for this upset. However, I'm leaning towards St. Mary's, and I'm going to take them. Alabama versus Robert Morris. The upset's not impossible. With how Alabama's defense plays, if they have a cold day on offense, they're screwed. However, I don't think Robert Morris is the team to do it. I'm taking Alabama to move on. Gonzaga versus Georgia. Really bad pull for Georgia here to have to play Gonzaga. I'm taking Gonzaga to move on. Can they beat Houston? We're going to have to see. Clemson versus McNeese. I'm not trying to pick too many 12 for 5 upsets because that's the common thing that everyone does. But I'm going to be honest. I like McNeese better. Clemson obviously has had a really good season. Again, they play in the fraudulent ACC, though, and McNeese always comes in as a really good team. I'm taking McNeese to move on. Purdue versus High Point. This is a sneaky good game. High Point, great 3-point shooting. If they're hot, they can beat any team in the nation. I don't like how they played in their conference championship. They almost lost that with the chance to go to their first ever tournament on the line. They almost lost that. That would have been disappointing for High Point fans because they just couldn't make it over the hump again. But obviously, that's what they did. They're here now. Will I take High Point? Yes. I will take High Point to move on to the round of 32 for the first time in their program's history. Purdue, they just don't look that good, in my opinion. Yeah, they're a pretty good team. They just don't look that good. They almost got swept by Indiana. Like, come on. They almost got swept by Indiana. I'm taking High Point to move on. We're just going to have to see how that plays out. Purdue has a history of getting upset really early in the tournament. Just saying, 16-1, 15-2, like 15-3, 14 over 3. No. They've had a bad history with getting upset early. I think that continues. I think High Point gets their first ever win. Illinois versus Texas or Xavier. I'm leaning Texas. Texas beat Texas A&M. So I'm leading Texas. I think they're slightly the better team than Xavier. Against Illinois, I'm taking Illinois. If they're all healthy and they're all good, they're one of the best teams in the nation. Now, obviously, getting destroyed by, what was it, Maryland, Wisconsin. Was it Purdue? I don't think it was Purdue. We have to check. Getting destroyed in the Big Ten tournament championship is not good. I still have hope for them. Texas could beat them. I'm leading Illinois. Kentucky versus Troy. Again, if this was a different 14 seed, I'd consider picking them. I don't have much hope in this Troy team. I'm taking Kentucky to move on. UCLA, Utah State. Again, don't really care for either team here. I'm going to take UCLA. Utah State definitely could pull off the upset here, but I'm leaning towards UCLA. And Tennessee versus Wofford. Wofford can be good. Wofford can be good. They're a pretty underrated team. However, Tennessee has looked great. I'm taking Tennessee to move on. Now, just to go back through my picks to make sure, I've got Auburn versus Louisville, San Diego Titans versus Texas A&M, Ole Miss versus Iowa State, Marquette versus Michigan State. In the West, Florida versus UConn, Colorado State versus Grand Canyon, Drake versus Texas Tech. I'm liking these more now. Kansas versus SJU. In the East, we have Duke versus Baylor, Liberty versus Arizona, BYU versus Wisconsin, SMC versus Alabama. And in the Midwest, we've got Houston versus Gonzaga, McNeese versus High Point. This is an interesting game there. Illinois versus Kentucky, and UCLA versus Tennessee. Now on to the round of 32. Auburn versus Louisville. Can Auburn do it? Can they do it? No, I don't think so. I don't think Auburn can do it. I don't think Louisville can do it. I already wasn't confident against them against Creighton, so I'm definitely not going to be too confident against them with Auburn. Now, Auburn has been on a little of a cold streak. I don't necessarily. They might not make the Final Four. It's gonna depend. Of course, Auburn has looked like one of the best teams in the country all year, but they're on a little of a cold streak. But I think they can pull it off against Louisville. Can you see San Diego pull off the upset against Texas A&M? It's definitely possible. I'm really, really liking this UC San Diego team. I'm taking Texas A&M. I think UC San Diego can beat Michigan. I don't think they have it in to beat Texas A&M. I think Texas A&M will move on to face Auburn in the Sweet 16. Ole Miss versus Iowa. I don't like this Ole Miss team at all. I'm taking Iowa State to move on. And Marquette versus Michigan. Again, I also don't like this Marquette team. I'm taking Michigan State to move on. So, pretty generic South region. Auburn versus Texas A&M. And Iowa State versus Michigan State. In the West, we have Florida versus UConn. Can UConn do it? No. I'm really liking this Florida team. I think they can go all the way and win it. We're going to see if I have them winning it, of course. But I'm taking Florida to move on to the Sweet 16. Colorado State versus Grand Canyon. Two interesting teams. I'm leaning Colorado State. Grand Canyon can definitely pull it off against Colorado State. However, Colorado State, again, been on a really good run. I'm picking them to move on to the Sweet 16. Texas Tech versus Drake. Now, this one is interesting. I'm not counting out Drake at all. I think Drake is a really good team. I think they can do it against Texas Tech. I think they can do it. I'm taking Drake over Texas Tech to move on to the Sweet 16. I'm really liking this Drake team, to be honest. And I have them going pretty far. Can they make it to the Elite 8? We're going to have to see. But Drake moves on and beats Texas Tech. Kansas versus St. John's. Again, if Kansas can get hot, Kansas can win these games. Kansas can go to the Elite Eight. Kansas can go to the Final Four. Kansas can win the whole thing if they can get hot and get ready. However, can they get hot and ready in time? I don't think so. I like this St. John's team. I have them moving on to the Sweet 16. In the East, Duke versus Baylor. This is an interesting game, especially if Flag isn't looking too good. I'm leaning towards Duke moving on. However, there's a staunch possibility that Baylor can win the game. Now, we have Liberty versus Arizona. And I think you know what I'm picking. I'm picking my boy Caden Metheny to move on to the Sweet 16. I am really confident in Liberty. I'm confident in them. Caden Metheny, a really good three-point shooter. I really like Caden Metheny. So, I'm taking Liberty to move on. Arizona, they definitely could easily win this game by like 50. They could also lose this game. So, Liberty, on to the Sweet 16. BYU versus Wisconsin. I was already talking about how I wasn't confident in Wisconsin. They're lucky they're facing Montana. They're not so lucky they're facing BYU now. I'm taking BYU to move on to the Sweet 16. And St. Mary's versus Alabama. Really defensive-minded team versus a really offensive-minded team. We saw this last year with a defense versus offense split. Alabama played a really good defensive team. I'm taking Alabama to move on. I think their offense can do enough, in my opinion. And they're going to beat St. Mary's, and they're going to move on to the Sweet 16. Finally, in the Midwest, we have Houston versus Gonzaga. That's definitely a very interesting game. It's a very interesting game. I'm not putting behind Gonzaga for winning this game, to be honest. I wouldn't be surprised one bit. Will I take it? Will I take it? No, I can't. I can't do it. I can't do it. Gonzaga maybe is going to make it close. I can't take Houston to go out in the round of 32. Obviously, not confident in winning it overall, but I think Gonzaga is just a little bit worse. And Houston moves on. We have McNeese versus High Point. It'd be really cool to see High Point make a Cinderella run. However, I'm liking this McNeese team a little bit more. I'm taking them to move on to the Sweet 16. Illinois versus Kentucky. This is an interesting game. I'm liking Illinois a lot. I'm also liking Kentucky a lot. They could both be frauds and not make it. And they can both look dominant and make it all the way to like the Elite Eight. To be honest, I'm leaning Illinois. I'm liking the Illinois team a lot. And Kentucky, they're good. They're not great. They're not great. And I think they will get upset again. And Illinois moves on. UCLA versus Tennessee. Not confident in this UCLA team at all. I'm taking Tennessee to move on. And now we are in the Sweet 16. We have Auburn versus Texas A&M. I don't think it's impossible that this Texas A&M team can move on. Auburn is on a slow streak. They are. That is true. I'm taking Auburn. Auburn has looked like the best team in the nation for months now. I think Auburn moves on. I don't think they can go on now. Iowa State versus Michigan State. Iowa State is a really good team. Michigan State is a really good team. I'm leaning Michigan State. Without bias. Again, win on an absolute heater. Won 8 quad one games in a row. Of course, they did, lose to Wisconsin. But that gave them rest. And that gave them realization on what went wrong. So, I think they're going to be locked in. I think they're going to make the Elite Eight. And possibly further. We're going to have to see. In the West, we have Florida and we have Colorado. Florida. I'm taking Florida to move on. Really confident in this Florida team. Colorado State, your run ends here. But don't feel bad, because you had a really good tournament win. Drake versus St. John's. Can Drake make the Elite Eight? No. St. John's, they are going to make it to the Elite Eight. Really, really like the St. John's team. Really confident in them. Great coach and everything. So I'm taking St. John's to move on. In the East, can Caden Metheny pull it off and beat Duke? No. I think this is where Caden Metheny's legacy run ends, and the Duke moves on to the Elite Eight. And BYU versus Alabama, it wouldn't shock me if BYU won this game. It wouldn't shock me one bit. To be honest, I might take them. I'm going to take them. I'm going to take BYU. I think they have a really good position here. I think Alabama's offense just goes dry in one of these games, and this might be against BYU. BYU has a really good team, a really underrated team, and honestly, they're a really good dark horse. Vaughn. So I'm taking BYU to move on to the Elite Eight. Now, in the Midwest, we have McNeese versus Houston. I'm taking Houston. It's going to be closer than many people think if McNeese and Houston face off, but I'm personally taking Houston to move on. Of course, McNeese, a really good team, but Houston, the better team, really good defense, obviously. Illinois versus Tennessee. This is a very interesting game. This is going to be a really close game. I'm thinking Tennessee moves on. I'm liking Tennessee better here. And they move on to the Elite Eight. Now, unfortunately, pretty generic Elite Eight. I'm kind of disappointed in that. However, that's just how the cookie crumbles sometimes. I think the great teams are great, and the not-so-great teams are, of course, not so great. So, in the South, we have Auburn versus Michigan State. And this may look biased. I'm taking Michigan State. Michigan State and Auburn have look like top tier amazing teams. Michigan State just has it in them this year. I think they can make the Final Four. Auburn, of course, great season. Just not enough for Michigan State. They move on to a Final Four appearance. It's just crazy. Florida versus St. John's. Can St. John's make it to the Final Four? Unfortunately, I think their run comes to the end. I'm taking Florida to move on to the Final Four. I really, really like this Florida team. St. John's, amazing season. It comes short in the Elite Eight. Now in the East, Duke versus BYU. I'm taking BYU. I'm taking BYU to go to the Final Four. Duke, obviously, really great team. Arguably one of the greatest teams in the nation. Again, it's going to depend on that injury, that Cooper Flagg injury. How long is he going to be injured? How bad is he going to be injured? I like BYU a lot. I have a lot of hope for this BYU team. I think they're going to do really good in the tournament. So I am taking BYU to move on. I'm taking them to move on to the Final Four. And in the Midwest, we have Houston versus Tennessee. Houston, obviously, really good defensive team. Tennessee has a pretty good defense too, and they have a pretty good offense too. I am taking Tennessee to move on to the Final Four. I like Tennessee a little bit better than Houston. Houston obviously disappointed me last year, going out in like the Sweet 16 or 32, I forgot which. I think it was the Sweet 16. So we have Michigan State versus Florida and BYU versus Tennessee. As a Michigan State fan, this is where the run ends. Florida, I like Florida a lot. I really like Florida a lot. I think Florida can win it all. And unfortunately, even as a Michigan State fan, I think this is where the run ends. Really, really amazing season from the boys. But it's it's just not enough. Florida moves on to the national championship. And we have BYU versus Tennessee. Can BYU keep up their legacy streak and move on to the national championship? No. I'm taking Tennessee to move on to the national championship. Tennessee, I think they're going to be mad that they didn't get the 1 seed. I think they're going to be angry. And they're going to lock in and try their all might to get in and make it to the Natty. And I think it's Tennessee's year to make it to the Natty. They're a really good team. They were 1 win away from being a 1 seed. So Tennessee moves on to the national championship. An all-SEC matchup which fits with 13 SEC teams in the tournament or something around there. I don't know when. Florida versus Tennessee. 2 really good teams. Florida has a really amazing offense. Their defense is all right. It's pretty good. Tennessee, well-balanced team. Who will win the national championship? I personally think out of every team that made this tournament, I think Florida wins it all. I think Florida wins it all. Florida are your national champions. We saw this game today. It didn't go too well for Tennessee. Florida are going to be your 2025 national champions. They conquer the dance and they win it all. How many total points will be scored in the championship game? 156. So yes, that is my bracket. 5 Florida win it all. This is my main one, of course. I'm gonna make more in my own private time. But thank you guys for watching. Obviously, if you made it all the way here, tell me which team you're a fan of. Tell me which team you're gonna take. BYU, Florida are your national champions, and I'll see you guys in my next video, which we're just gonna have to see soon. I don't really know what video I'm gonna make next, but I'll see you guys later, and peace.